Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. You are listening to Alumless. Glad to have you with us. I am Ryan Catherwood. The gentleman sitting opposite me, the screen, listener, is Chris Marshall. Chris is the founder and CEO of CMAC, and Alumless is a CMAC production. Every other week, we try to bring you a show about engagement strategies and educational advancement. As you know, we have a special guest on each show, and we have all different themes with our guests, and we record a bonus 30 minutes that you can listen to on our podcast version of Alumless. So if you are enjoying these conversations, be sure to check out the podcast as well and hear more from our guests each week. But for most people, Chris, I think 30 minutes is just about all they can handle.
Of us
it's a
live.
lot. It's a lot hearing from us for that kind of time. Today's Friday, May 12th. We are live, of course. We have a great special guest, Thomas McArthur, Associate Vice President, Alumni Engagement and Annual Giving at the University of Buffalo. So if you've got any questions for Thomas, we're going to bring them out in a little bit. Be sure to pose them in the chat. We can actually, it's not the chat, it's the LinkedIn comments, right? So if you post it in the LinkedIn event comments, we can see it here in our interface. So be sure to do that.
And Matthew Winston joining in from SUNY Binghamton. What's up, Matthew?
Good to see you. Glad to have Matthew joining us. Matt Winston. And all right, so you are not at your desk in the Casa Marshall. You are traveling. You're on the road at a lovely hotel in Brunswick, Maine. What are you doing?
Living a life in the Fairfield Inn, the Road Warrior. I'm at Bowdoin College today. We've been working with them for about a year and a half on several projects. We did a review last year, presented that about a year ago, and then went into a strategic planning process, and we're presenting that to the Board of Trustees today. So they had a very engaged Board of Trustees on this process. In fact, they not only did board, but alumni board, all these different volunteers. They had 62 volunteers through 11 different focus groups provide feedback on the strategic plan. So we have a lot of input to share, and we're going to go over that today.
One of the most engaged alumni populations there is. I think we had Dan Olds on the show a few episodes back.
They run a 40 to 50% giving rate. They've been even higher years ago. And their engagement rate is, in the 50, 60% range. And they had a goal for their campaign of 85% of their alumni engaged over the life of the campaign, and they're going to hit it. So they're very engaged.
It's really cool. And so, we wanted to talk a little bit about culture changes as a way to frame up today's episode. And, you've led a couple of alumni shops at Lehigh and then at Cornell. And I have to imagine at both of those leadership roles, there were culture change initiatives, right? You were seeing like a need for some change, and you're like, all right, I got to shift to culture. Like when you reflect back on those two roles and what you were trying to accomplish and sort of the culture shift, what were you doing? What were you thinking about?
I will tell you two quick stories because I want to get Thomas out here. But one at Lehigh, I inherited a team that's been doing good people doing good work for a long time. But as you walked into the suite of offices, there was a bank of file cabinets filled with files and binders of previous year's events and activities. And after the first few months, I said, we're emptying those file cabinets, getting rid of everything in it, where they're gone. And just because I didn't want people going back to the old, what we've always done, and open it up and do it again. So that was a big culture change there. And then at Cornell, I inherited, when I arrived, we were in an old alumni house up on campus. The rest of the division was down just off edge of campus. And it was a 28-person alumni team. And when it was all said and done, I left 5 years later, but 3 years later, we were at 53 people. We got rid of 10 and added 35 new hires, which completely changed the posture of the alumni program, which was to lean away from the rest of advancement and to be it was a strong alumni base, very loyal alumni population, actually a pretty solid program but a very traditional program that was postured away from the rest of advancement. So I came in under Charlie Flager's leadership, and he said, I need you to help me move this back to leaning into advancement. That's really what it was. And we spent 3 years changing it, and then 2 years kind of experiencing that change, which was wonderful, but it's hard.
It's hard. And that, I think, the change that you described is one that, a lot of vice presidents from advancement are looking to see accomplished, right? It's often why we get hired as
Exactly.
consultants to help. In that respect, there's no doubt about that. I think there's other sort of cultural changes that are interesting, like shifting around approaches to engagement. For example, ingraining technology, using new technology, right? I mean, in my last role, I tried to make sure we were tackling problems with a digital first perspective on things, and
another one is the board change, the culture of the board and the role of the board. You tell a great story about how in the early days of your time at Longwood, you took up meditating to deal with the stress of the board.
God, I had never been so stressed out in my professional life, just working with the alumni board. And, over the course of time, you got to earn some wins and develop relationships and then have some strategic direction. Then I think, I had so much less anxiety over time, but because of the direction the board went. But so we've got a great guest today to talk about these issues and more. We're going to go ahead and bring out our special guest. Let's bring him out to the show, add to the stream. Thomas McArthur, how are you?
Hey, good, guys. How are you doing?
Best backdrop in the business.
Hey, this is great. They redid this office and made sure that they had this beautiful UV blue painted with logo. And yeah, it's a great spot to entertain alumni.
Well, we've been talking, Thomas, as you've heard, about sort of organizational change, and you've been in your role at the University of Buffalo for better than a year now, but Buffalo is your alma mater, right? You've been a volunteer there. You have been really a part of that organization's alumni program, not just running it, but, breathing it for a long time. And we wanted to talk today about some organizational change and changing cultures and that sort of issue as sort of the string for our episode. But maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about the shift in culture you've been trying to bring about at the University of Buffalo.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Chris. It's hard, right? Even if it's change that we all agree on, that we know will get us to a better spot, it still takes a lot of time. It takes reinforcement. It takes checking back in with our teams to ensure that, we are still moving in the right direction. So, when I think about the culture shift that we're making here, first, we've got an amazing team who's doing really great work. But oftentimes in alumni engagement, there's this idea that the more we do, the better we are. And that's not always the case, right? And so we have to really focus on being strategic and intentional, focus on our goals. So in order to get to there, I think I kind of follow the kind of Ted Lasso approach, which is if you get the culture right, the results will follow. If we build a culture that is inclusive and diverse, where people feel like they belong, where they are seen and celebrated as their whole self, where we have balance and intentionality, where we allow people's voices to be heard. If we focus on the balance, all of the other things will follow. So we've done a couple of things, I think, that are innovative to try to move in that direction. So the first thing we did was talking with the team, looking at the number of meetings everyone had over the course of the day. And so we instituted these two pauses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And we agreed that as our teams, annual giving and alumni engagement, we wouldn't schedule any internal meetings during that time. And so it was meant to give people a chance to get up, don't look at the screen, take a walk, color, meditate, refocus yourself, listen to some music. Because all the research, and Case has done some research around this as well, it shows that when we actually do those pauses, our brains kind of cool down a little bit, right? When we're not in meetings all day. And that allows us to be more creative, more intentional, more efficient. And so that was one thing that we did. But even that, everyone really wants to do it. The challenge is being consistent with doing it, right? Reminding everyone, because it's hard once you get into a project to kind of, it's time for the pause. And so we've really kind of focused on being flexible and saying, take your pause at some time in the morning and sometime in the afternoon. But that's, really important. And when we think about intentionality, we've created, and this came from, Chris, these 6 questions that we're asking everyone to think about, does the project align with our goals? So anytime we think about something new, what do we want to accomplish? What's the outcome? who's the target audience? How are we going to measure success? And this is on everyone's desk. We've got it on our conference room tables. Another just slight reminder that we want to be intentional in everything we do. And the last thing I'll share, which is something I've been doing for a while, are these kind of water drops. And so the whole idea came from a book of Don Clifton, How to Fill Your Bucket. Everyone's got a water bucket. Good, if positive interactions, fill it, negative, drain it. So every time someone does something great, recognize them. So people are hanging these on their walls, their bulletin boards, their doors. It's a chance to celebrate the great work that people are doing. And I don't think we often do that enough. It's just on to the next project, the next event, the next trip. And we've really got to focus on celebrating those wins.
Yeah. Love it, Thomas. I love everything you just described there. And the old notion of culture eats strategy for breakfast is really true. And if you don't get after it the way you're doing it with constant reinforcement, love the water bucket thing, all that wonderful. Good stuff, man. Good for you.
Thanks.
Good lesson.
Well, and so Thomas, as you've been thinking about a unified strategy for alumni engagement, a lot of the things you've been working towards and you've been describing as changing culture, right? But I think it's fair to say that you've also had to make some structural changes, right? And process changes. UB is a large state institution. It's a complicated place. There's, as a guy who worked at the University of Virginia, also a complicated place that, when there's a place that has a lot of amazing dynamics to it, what it looks like. So how would you describe some of the structural changes that exist, challenges that exist, and that prevent everyone perhaps from moving forward in the same direction?
Yeah, it is. It's an incredibly complex institution. And so we've got a little bit of everything. We've got the central office that does a lot of kind of those anchor programs, homecoming and alumni reunion weekend, and some of the taking faculty on the road. And then we have some of our schools and units that have alumni officers who report up through our central office. And then we've got some alumni officers who report up through their deans, who also carry other priorities within their titles. And so trying to get everyone to move in the right direction has certainly been challenging, not because anyone doesn't want to. Everyone wants to move in this direction. I think that's been clear from this strategic planning process. What we have to do is, put in the process, the structure that allows us to communicate regularly, that allows us to tap into the expertise of each of those individuals and how they work with boards and their deans and faculty. So we started off the year with a retreat with everyone on the team to think about, what's going well, what are pain points, where do we need to move some big boulders. And then we've got every other month meetings with those individuals to talk about some of those big kind of topics that we're looking to solve. So it's certainly complicated, but the strategic planning process has allowed us to bring all the key players to the table, from athletics to student life, to every school and unit, to the central office, to talk about what do we value, what do we do well, where are the opportunities that we have, and what can we take advantage of. We're a lean shop. We do not have the most number of, the largest number of staff or budget dollars, but we've got people who want to move in that direction of a coordinated effort. So when we communicate, we don't just communicate to the central staff, we communicate to all of our alumni officers. When we celebrate wins, we do it with everyone. When we celebrate the most successful giving day at the University at Buffalo that we just had last month, we do it with everyone. It's really about being intentional in the communication and building trust and those relationships that are so important to our work. We do it externally all the time. We're out there, working with our boards and developing those relationships. Sometimes we forget that our internal campus partners can be just as powerful and helpful and important to our work. And so, those are some of the ways that we've tried to really build that coalition of all of us moving in that same direction.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks, Thomas. That was great. And Chris, you of course have had a chance to work with UB on an assessment, right? As we described, we're doing some strategic planning work, putting the finishing touches on that with Thomas and his team there. I start thinking big picture now. What are the factors that really make a difference in terms of making sure that Thomas, the rest of the university, everybody is moving forward together in the right direction?
Yeah, I think Thomas has touched on it. Is the key to all of it is the one word, partnerships. Thomas, on that list of the 6 questions, you went through the first 4. Read the 5th question.
Who else needs to know about our plans? And that is internal to advancement and all of our campus partners. So you're exactly right. It makes us pause and go, who else should I be collaborating with on this?
Yeah. How many times, Ryan, Thomas, you've seen this too, where the person across the hall from somebody doesn't know about the thing they've been working on. It's the next day, and all of a sudden, oh, did you know that the volunteer thing is happening or whatever? And we just don't tell people, let alone our partners across campus. And at a big place like UB, it's critical that we're communicating and coordinating and collaborating and partnering. And the best alumni directors, I like to think, spend some of their time each week in their office, some of their time each week walking around campus, and some of their time each week traveling to regions where their alumni are. And Thomas just came back from an event. In fact, would you mind telling everybody what you guys just did last night? I would love everybody to hear that story.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the series of events, and then I'll tell you, this is another culture shift, I think, that I'm super proud of the team for. So we had this global alumni networking night on our Founders Day, the day of the birthday of the university, 29 events in 9 different countries. Our international Wayloon was pulling in volunteers from our international cities. Patty Starr was pulling in domestically all across the country. So they were just happy hour networking events. And the coolest part to me was, and this is totally internal, right? Alumni didn't know about this piece, but throughout the course of the day, as the staff was traveling, everyone was posting little things from their adventures in a Teams chat. And then as the event started, people were posting photos and stories of connecting with alumni. And it was just a great way to celebrate months of hard work in the making. So yeah, it was great to have the staff out there meeting with alumni, developing relationships with key volunteers, and doing board recruitment, all of those good things.
My rule of thumb on an alumni position like yours, Thomas, is 3 days a week on average in the office working with your team, 1 day a week working around campus, conducting those partnership meetings and collaborations, and 1 day a week on the road. Average that out over the course of a year, and that's roughly 20% on the road, 20% around campus, and 60% of your time focusing with your team. And that's probably a lot in the office for someone who's in early in their career. As you get further in your career, those numbers on the other two can go up. More time on campus and more time out on the road. I see, Ryan, real quick before you jump on to the next question. Joshua Jones. Joshua, how are you? Put in the chat. Are those 6 questions in shareable form? Yes, they are. Joshua, just send me an email. chris.marshall@cmac.me, and I'll send it to anybody on the call. Please feel free to send me.
Why don't we throw it up on our LinkedIn, the CMAC feed on LinkedIn, and Josh and anybody else, if you're not following CMAC on LinkedIn, do that, and I'll share in a post after the show.
Yeah. And thanks to Pete and our colleague Carla. How are you, Carla? And Rosalind from joining in from University of Warwick, and Dan Olds, who's 2 miles away from me here in Brunswick, Maine. I'm going to see him in about a half hour.
Glad you could join, everybody. But so, Thomas, let's talk a little bit more about some of the structural elements that can prevent culture shift. Have you had to reset some of the priorities when it came to emphasizing different programs and initiatives in an attempt to sort of change the culture?
Yeah, so when I first arrived last June, we had one individual who was working 50% of the time on affinity engagement, and how it's kind of defined as clubs, organizations, and engaging those alumni. And while I think that is incredibly important, and I'd love to have 2 or 3 people doing that type of work, the one piece that we were missing was a real focus on identity-based alumni engagement. And so we looked around campus. We looked at from a student life perspective, where was the university focusing on? So students of color, LGBTQ+, Latinx, women, first generation college students. And we said, okay, this is an area where we have to reallocate budget dollars and staff time to ensure that we are creating an inclusive alumni community. One where alumni see themselves in the programming that we're doing. And this is a complicated, challenging topic to address. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and so we are pushing through that discomfort at times because we know that makes us better. We know when we focus on diversity, when we diversify our teams, our boards, our volunteers, that we all get better. We come up with better ideas. We engage more people. So that is a real focus for us this year. We're able to hire a graduate assistant for multicultural alumni engagement. So with that kind of shift, it also aligned with, as a division, we just finished a strategic plan for DEI. And kind of the three components of that are, one, how do we make sure that our staff have the cultural competencies they need in order to do the work that we're trying to accomplish? Two, how do we focus on attracting diverse talent, retaining them, promoting them? And three, then how do we focus on creating an inclusive alumni engagement community? So we just had an Alumni of Color reception in New York. We had one in Buffalo. Huge success. And I say that based on the number of people who were engaged at that event, taking photos, posting to social media, telling other people they should have been there. That is going to be a key focus for us moving forward. But it took some reallocation of resources, and sometimes we've got to do that, and we have to stop doing some of the things that we have done for a long time, right, Chris, to your point earlier. Sometimes we get in a little bit of a habit, and we've got to be focused on maybe pausing and reallocating those resources to be where we need to.
It's tough, there's a lot of, job responsibilities around those, existing initiatives, right? There's someone's baby, right? Someone's baby, that you have to stop, right? And sort of come around to the idea that all programs run their course and all of them need reinvigoration at one point or another, if not in an ongoing way, right? Yeah. But so what do you think surprised you the most so far, and their efforts to sort of shift culture for the first year you've been there?
I think it not necessarily a surprise, but this is I believe true in every place that I've ever worked, which is if we empower our staff to think about those changes that we were just talking about, if we empower them to be creative, to think big, they can really come up with some amazing ideas and concepts. And so, I use our regional programs for an example. We had 26 regions. We tried to do everything equal in all of them. And we just can't do that. We don't have the staff, the human resources, or the dollars in order to be super successful in that. So working with our staff member who oversees the regions to say, gosh, if you were to do this from scratch, how would you do it? How would you prioritize? What are the criteria you would look at to evaluate which regions should get the most resources, which get the secondary tier, and then which get really just volunteer engagement? And that has happened so many times where the staff has stepped in to say, hey, I've got some new ideas that I want to try out. And when you empower our teams to do that, they often come up with just amazing ideas. And then you bring other people to the table. We get even better, right? We continue to refine until we've got this finished product, just like the strategic plan. The more voices, the better. And sometimes that can be, I would say, frustrating for the individuals who own those programs, or even us as leaders, because, in order to do it right, it takes time. And I am the first person to say I'm guilty of always wanting to see the maximum results, the maximum amount of impact as quick as possible. But we've got to slow ourselves down, because we know that when we slow down, when we gather the feedback, we get the input, it does come up with a better product. But we need patience. And I don't always have that, as people will tell you.
Two follow-up comments from me on this, Ryan, is one, Thomas has given, as a leader, the license for that to happen. And it starts with the leader giving that license permission to think differently and do. So kudos to you, Thomas. There's a management skill set, there's a leadership skill set, and I could see the way you're talking, you clearly have that. And it's been fun to watch on the sideline. So kudos to you. And the second thing is, one of our former guests on our show, Brian Cisco, the VP for advancement at NC State, he uses the expression when we talk about how quickly do we need to move on this thing, and he'll always say, I'll give him full credit for this. I love this line. He says, as fast as we can, but as slow as we must.
That's great.
Brilliant. It's a brilliant line.
Yeah.
You know what it means. When you go too fast, you're going to piss off somebody along the way, and you got to slow it down to make sure they get back on the board and all that. So
It's kind of like it's sort of similar to we're building the plane while we're flying it, only using different terms,
Right.
which I think what you've just described is a little healthier than describing we're building the plane and flying it at the same time. So, but that makes a lot of sense. But one of the things I wanted to mention that I feel like one of the big culture shifts a lot of alumni teams are trying to make is embracing metrics, right? Is embracing data, making data-driven decisions. I think back to my own tenure, one of the things I was most excited about was how we were able to make a lot of decisions on the people who were going to be in our volunteer programs, on our alumni board, based on a history of engagement participation, right? Based on having engagement data that told us who our cheerleaders, our brand ambassadors were. How are you thinking about metrics at UB? And Chris, maybe you could follow that point up just with how you see metrics being sort of an important part of any engagement culture shift.
Yeah, I think, we have fully embraced metrics for a long time. Back, I would probably say 10, 12, 15 years ago, Larry Zielinski, who sat in this role, and Kristen Murphy were very important in developing an engagement score, thinking about metrics and reporting. And so we've had kind of a long history of that. We fully adopted the AEM metrics. Jeff Bartlett led those efforts here for UB before my arrival. So we've got goals around every single one of the 4 modes. We've hit our volunteer goal. So far, we hit that last month. We're very close on the experiential and the communication, and getting closer on the philanthropy. And then we also have a dashboard that shows school and unit metrics for all the 4 modes. So that's one piece. Then we also look at, how are we bringing more non-engaged alumni into the fold? So increasing that number. Deepening those relationships. So we're still looking at engagement score to show some deepening. I'd like to see us get to a point where for each of the 4 modes, we could look at the number of engagements within a particular mode, and then how does that change behavior, but we're not there yet. We're also looking at things like how do we help support retention in the annual fund and acquisition of new donors? How do we look at the number of dollars we bring in through events and texting to give, all of those types of things. And actually an idea that Kristen Murphy brought back from a conference really focuses on how do we engage those alumni who have been disqualified by gift officers, right? They obviously had a meeting with a gift officer, and maybe they can't give at a major gift level, but they may be very interested in how they engage with the university. And we could actually help keep that going by referrals to our digital gift officer program or to our alumni engagement officers in the schools and units. So that's how we're thinking about metrics, right? You want to be data focused, but I think or data focused, field driven, I think is what a former VP used to say, right? We want to know the work that we have to do, but you've got to be informed by the data in order to make the biggest impact.
Yep. I'm a big metrics person. I coached a sport that went to the 100th of a second, so I had a scoreboard at the end of the day. So. But whenever I get into my metrics groove, I always stop and I say, let me before I go any further on this. At the end of the day, we're a relationship business, and we have to keep that in mind. It's about people, so we can't lose track of that. My comment on this, Thomas, that you already. First of all, I would describe what you're doing at UB as if someone was to go on a journey. We'll use a baseball metaphor, and around the base paths. You guys are rounding third compared to most places. Most places are just getting out of the batter's box on this. So you've got some pretty sophisticated modeling work that you're doing that's going to allow you to make some informed decisions with. So I love that. One of the next steps, though, and you started it there, is the sharing the data with the deans or any other partner on a college or university campus. And when we did this at Cornell, I'll never forget it, Ryan. We shared the 10 colleges and schools. Here's our overall alumni engagement data. And here's how it breaks down by school and college. And then never forget the hotel school dean, which would have, should have, and has ever since the highest engagement score because it's a very niche program at the institution, had the lowest score when we presented it. And I insisted it was right. And he said, well, it can't be. We're the hotel school. I said, well, this is what's in the database. And he turned and looked at his advancement person. The next day, they had the highest score because it wasn't in the database, right? It doesn't happen if it's not in there. So recording it is a simple thing, but it's an important component to it. So
And
Anyway.
it's
Yeah,
hard
Chris,
too, like recording things,
can I-
you know? Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just add one piece to that, Chris, which is so historically, advancement has met with each dean, set goals at the beginning of the year, and then also a mid-year review. And alumni engagement was not at the table for that.
Yeah,
and this year
I'm
we
so
made
glad.
the change
I
to
know.
include alumni engagement and annual
Love it.
giving at both the mid-year and the goal setting, which allows us to, to present to the deans as if engagement is a critical, because it is, part of our fundraising success. It's not necessarily that it happens over here and then someday they make a gift. No, it's about this holistic engagement. And you're right, the deans can be very competitive. So it's good to show them that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it was. When they saw themselves against each other, they were like, oh. So real quick shout out to Carol Bassey, Scott Francis, and Robert Cherry on the chat. Thank you for your comments and for joining us. East Carolina in the house, and War Damn Eagle, Scott.
Yeah. Love seeing that in the chat. Thanks for everyone for joining. We're up against the time clock already, so we're gonna shift gears and record our bonus section of the podcast this week. But Chris, who do we have on in 2 weeks?
We have Angelique Grant from the Inclusion Firm. So that we have several partner. CMAC works with Washburn McGoldrick, several other groups, and one of them is the Inclusion Firm, who does diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work, and she is one of the best in the business. You'll love her. So we'll be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within advancement, and some of the work she's been doing with many of her clients, and some of them overlap with ours.
Yeah, great guest. Excited for that conversation. Really important one.
That's in 4 weeks, because we're taking next 2 weeks
from
from now. We're taking off, Ryan. Remember, we're taking the Memorial Day week off.
So I know everyone's going to be disappointed that we're not going to be around in 2 weeks. You'll be missing an Alumless in your feed in 2 weeks, but we'll be back in June with a great guest. And thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you later.
Thank you all. Thomas,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you. Well
Have
done.
a great day.